The sea is calm now, but in the ancient past, its waves carried the voices of gods and kings. Among them was Poseidon, lord of the sea, whose trident shook the earth and commanded the tides. He was a god of immense power, feared and respected, yet also proud and quick to remember a slight. Far across the waters stood the shining city of Troy, its walls rising high against the sky. Troy was strong, admired, and blessed by many, yet its fate would be tied to a broken promise. For once, long ago, Poseidon lent his strength to help raise those very walls in noble grandeur. He worked beside Apollo, the god of light, both disguised as men, building with divine hands. The stones rose smooth and perfect, forming defenses no mortal enemy could break. When the task was done, the gods came to collect the payment they were promised. But the king of Troy, Laomedon, turned his heart to greed and pride. He refused the reward, casting aside honor as though gods could be deceived and forgotten. From that moment, Poseidon's heart carried a tide of anger, waiting to rise. And so our story begins, with a god, a city, and the storm that would follow. The city of Troy stood proud upon the shores, a beacon of stone rising against the endless sky. Its towers touched the clouds, and its gates gleamed like bronze beneath the warmth of the sun. Travelers who came from distant lands marveled at the beauty and strength of its mighty walls. The air around Troy carried the voices of markets, the rhythm of footsteps, and songs of hope. Ships sailed in from the Aegean, bringing goods, treasures, and whispers of foreign lands. The streets bustled with merchants, warriors, and children playing between the tall, shadowed gates. Every stone of Troy seemed alive, as if the walls themselves guarded the dreams of its people. The city was not only strong in body, but rich in spirit, filled with faith in its golden destiny. Its rulers believed Troy had been touched by fate, chosen by gods to stand against the world. The walls were said to be unbreakable, their lines too perfect for mortal hands alone to craft. Legends spread like fire, telling that divine power had guided the labor of those ancient stones. Many believed the gods had once walked there, disguised in mortal form, shaping Troy with care. The rivers flowed gently, circling the city like silver threads woven into a sacred garment. Fields around Troy shone with golden harvests, feeding both the people and their pride. No army dared approach, for the sight of the walls turned courage into hesitation. The citizens lived with joy, believing themselves untouchable under their shining crown of towers. Priests raised prayers to Apollo, Athena, and Zeus, hoping to keep blessings strong upon the city. Sacrifices of grain and wine filled the temples, smoke rising as offerings to the heavens. But the sea beyond the shore held another story, one of gods who never forgot or forgave. For while Troy's people sang of triumph, a shadow waited, carried on the restless tide. The walls they trusted had been raised with more than stone, more than mortal strength alone. Behind those walls lingered a debt, a broken promise, and the silent wrath of the sea. Poseidon, lord of oceans, once placed his hand upon this city, shaping it in quiet power. With Apollo beside him, he labored in disguise, working not as a god, but as a man. He raised the towers that now touch the clouds, each stone bearing a mark of divine craft. Yet the gratitude once owed was denied, and dishonor stained the bond between king and god. Though time passed and Troy grew strong, Poseidon's memory was as deep as the sea. The ocean forgets no insult, and neither does the god who commands its endless tide. Still, Troy stood, unaware of the storm that one day would rise against its mighty gates. The people looked only upward, toward glory, not downward, the sea whispered of fate. The city became a jewel admired by all, yet jewels glimmer brightest before shadows fall. And as the waves rolled gently against the shore, a story of pride and promise lingered still. The gods had shaped Troy, but the gods had also been wronged, and wrongs are not forgotten. So Troy's towers stood tall, reaching the heavens, yet carrying within them a hidden weight. It was the weight of betrayal, quiet and patient, waiting for the moment to be heard. In this silence lay the seed of Poseidon's anger, buried deep but never fading away. The city sparkled under the sun, but beneath the sea, a god's storm slowly gathered strength. Poseidon was more than a god of the sea. He was a power that shaped both earth and ocean with his will. His trident could stir storms, split mountains, and bring calm or chaos to every shore touched by water. Sailors prayed to him before journeys, leaving offerings of wine, shells, and small treasures by the waves. Without his blessing, no voyage was safe, for the sea belonged to him and answered only to his command. He was brother to Zeus, ruler of the sky, and Hades, lord of the underworld, a trinity of power. Together, they divided the world, but Poseidon's realm was boundless, stretching across endless horizons. He was not only feared for his storms, but honored as a builder, a creator of cities and harbors. His temples stood near coasts and islands, pillars echoing the rhythm of waves and salt upon the wind. Mortals knew him as protector of horses, as well as father of heroes born from mortal and divine blood. Yet beyond these titles, Poseidon was a god of moods, shifting like tides between peace and fury. When pleased, he blessed lands with fertile soil, calm seas, and prosperity for fishermen and farmers alike. When angered, he shook the ground, sending tremors through fields, toppling towers built upon weak trust. His presence was not confined to the ocean's edge, but felt deep inland where rivers and springs began. Every ripple of water was his voice. Every storm cloud over the sea carried his silent authority. The Greeks respected his power, knowing that to anger him was to invite storms no walls could hold. Stories told of sailors who ignored his name, and their ships vanished under sudden waves of wrath. But Poseidon was not cruelty itself, for he valued honor, respect, and the keeping of sacred promises. His pride was as vast as the ocean, and once betrayed, his heart carried the wound like a scar. In Troy's story, Poseidon's role was not just that of an enemy, but of a creator turned against creation. He had once offered his strength to mortals, lowering himself into their world with patience and skill. He showed that even a god could labor, shaping stone, lifting walls, and walking as if he were man. This act was a gift, but it was also a bond. For divine work carried divine expectation of respect. To be denied that honor was to deny the god himself, as though the sea could be ignored. Poseidon's wrath was not sudden lightning, but a slow tide, rolling forward with quiet determination. His memory was eternal, his patience vast, yet his justice certain as the return of waves to shore. This was the god who turned his gaze upon Troy, not as a stranger, but as one once betrayed. He was not a distant thundercloud, but a storm building slowly across the years, waiting for its time. When mortals spoke of him, they used names that carried both love and fear, reverence and caution. They called him Earthshaker, Sea Lord, Stormbringer, Builder, and Father, each name a piece of his soul. Children learned to whisper his name when waves grew restless, as if calming a wild and endless beast. Priests knew his temples must never be neglected, for silence was taken as insult by the sea. His greatness lay not only in destruction, but in balance, for the sea gave life as much as it took. In the story of Troy, Poseidon stood as both architect and judge, a god who remembered everything. And in remembering, he became the tide that would one day test the strength of the city itself. Long before the War of Troy, before heroes clashed, a quiet tale of labor and trust was born. Laomedon, king of Troy, sought to raise his city higher. With walls that could stand for all time, he wished for defenses stronger than mortal hands could craft, towers worthy of divine admiration. And so, he prayed and promised, calling upon powers greater than men to shape his proud city. Poseidon heard, and Apollo as well, both gods mighty, yet choosing to walk as simple builders. They disguised themselves as mortals, cloaking their brilliance, taking tools of stone and wood in hand. Together, they stood beside Troy's laborers, their strength hidden, their touch weaving secrets in stone. Day by day, the walls of Troy began to rise, each stone fitted with care beyond mortal skill. The people marveled, unaware of the divine hands guiding their work, shaping a fortress eternal. Poseidon lifted boulders as if they were pebbles, setting them in place with seamless perfection. Apollo measured each line, ensuring towers shone straight as rays of light, proud and unyielding. The walls grew taller, gleaming beneath the sun as if kissed by heaven and guarded by the sea. Laomedon walked among the builders, his eyes filled with pride at the glory taking form. He promised the gods reward, a gift worthy of their service, should the task be completed. And so Poseidon worked on, not as stormbringer, but as builder, patient and steady in craft. Apollo too gave his light, singing quiet songs that lifted hearts and eased the weight of toil. The city transformed stone by stone until the towers rose like guardians watching over the plains. Its gates shone like bronze, its ramparts wide, its presence unshakable against winds and years. Mortals saw only strength, but the gods saw a promise, a bond of honor between man and divine. The wall was not just a shield of stone, but a covenant carved in sweat, faith, and trust. Every stone carried not only weight, but the memory of divine labor given in silence and grace. The gods could have revealed their power, but chose humility, asking only for loyalty in return. They desired no temples of gold, no endless praise, only the payment Laomedon had sworn to give. Yet beneath his pride, the king's heart carried shadows, whispers of greed stronger than gratitude. He watched the walls rise and wondered if his debt could be cast aside, hidden behind power. To him, the gods in mortal guise were but workers, and workers could be dismissed or denied. He saw not their gift, but only what he might save by breaking his sacred word. Still the walls stood tall, a marvel of strength and beauty, a crown upon Troy's noble brow. The people rejoiced, believing themselves untouchable behind the brilliance of their new defenses. But the gods knew, and Poseidon felt. The fragile thread of honor strained thin in the king's heart. The sea god, who had given his hand in labor, also carried within him the pride of eternity. For Poseidon, promises were not mortal dust to be swept away, but sacred bonds unbroken by time. And when that bond was betrayed, the sea itself would remember, carrying the weight of insult. Yet for now, Troy's walls gleamed, the city basked in triumph, and silence hung like calm seas. But beneath that silence, beneath stone and song, a storm had begun, its patient, unseen rise. When the last stone was set, and the walls of Troy touched the sky, the gods stood silent and waiting. Their labor was done, their gift complete, and the city gleamed as though kissed by the hands of heaven. Laomedon walked among his people, his heart swelling with pride as he gazed upon the mighty towers. He knew that Troy now stood unassailable, a fortress that no mortal enemy could ever hope to breach. But with the walls complete, there remained a promise, a vow sworn between mortal king and immortal gods. Poseidon and Apollo, still in their mortal guise, approached the king to claim the reward he had offered. It was not a tribute of temples, nor endless praise, but a simple payment agreed upon before the work. The king looked upon them with eyes clouded not by gratitude, but by suspicion and growing greed. Why should he pay such men? He thought, when the walls now stood strong and the city was secure. He saw only mortals before him, weary from their toil, and he dismissed the thought of divine presence. The king's pride whispered that he alone was the maker of Troy's greatness, not humble builders of stone. And so he denied them their reward, his voice steady, his heart hardened by arrogance and deceit. "You shall have nothing," he declared, "for your labor is ended, and your worth is no longer needed." In that moment, the bond was broken, a sacred promise cast aside as though it were dust on the wind. Poseidon's gaze grew dark, though he said little, for the sea god's wrath was deep and patient as the tide. Apollo, radiant yet silent, turned his eyes away, for even the god of light felt shadow in that hour. The people of Troy, unaware of the truth, celebrated the walls as though they had risen by mortal hands. They sang songs of their king's wisdom and strength, blind to the betrayal that had stained his honor. But beneath the songs and celebration, a silence lingered, heavy as storm clouds waiting at sea. The gods had been deceived, their labors scorned, and their trust cast aside in the name of pride. To betray a man was grave, but to betray a god was a wound that eternity itself would remember. Laomedon returned to his palace, his heart light with triumph, blind to the weight of what he had done. He believed the matter closed, the promise forgotten, the builders dismissed as if they were nothing. But Poseidon carried the insult like salt in the ocean, bitter and sharp, never to be dissolved away. For the sea forgets nothing, and the god who stirs its waves remembers every word, every broken vow. Apollo too withdrew, his light dimmed, yet his silence carried more judgment than the words ever could. The city stood proud, its towers shining, but within their foundation a curse now lay in waiting. Not a curse of spell or shadow, but of memory, for gods do not forget, nor forgive with ease. The walls that promised safety also carried the seed of doom, hidden yet certain, like a tide unseen. In the years to come, Troy would trust in those walls, believing themselves beyond reach of harm. Yet every stone was a reminder to Poseidon, every tower a symbol of the insult that had been cast. And though he turned away, the sea god's heart burned with anger, slow and vast as the ocean's depth. The waves whispered his fury, carrying it to distant shores, warning that Troy's pride would one day fall. For broken promises are not buried. They drift like wreckage, always returning to the shore in time. And so the betrayal of Laomedon became the seed of Poseidon's wrath, a storm waiting to awaken. The walls stood tall, the city rejoiced, but the sea beyond was restless, its master silent yet watchful. And in that silence, the fate of Troy was sealed, not by war yet, but by the anger of the sea. When the last stone was set and the walls of Troy touched the sky, the gods stood silent in waiting. Their labor was done, their gift complete, and the city gleamed as though kissed by the hands of heaven. Laomedon walked among his people, his heart swelling with pride as he gazed upon the mighty towers. He knew that Troy now stood unassailable, a fortress that no mortal enemy could ever hope to breach. But with the walls complete, there remained a promise, a vow sworn between mortal king and immortal gods. Poseidon and Apollo, still in their mortal guise, approached the king to claim the reward he had offered. It was not a tribute of temples, nor endless praise, but a simple payment agreed upon before the work. The king looked upon them with eyes clouded not by gratitude, but by suspicion and growing greed. Why should he pay such men, he thought, when the walls now stood strong and the city was secure? He saw only mortals before him, weary from their toil, and he dismissed the thought of divine presence. The king's pride whispered that he alone was the maker of Troy's greatness, not humble builders of stone. And so he denied them their reward, his voice steady, his heart hardened by arrogance and deceit. "You shall have nothing," he declared, "for your labor is ended, and your worth is no longer needed." In that moment, the bond was broken, a sacred promise cast aside as though it were dust on the wind. Poseidon's gaze grew dark, though he said little, for the sea god's wrath was deep and patient as the tide. Apollo, radiant yet silent, turned his eyes away, for even the god of light felt shadow in that hour. The people of Troy, unaware of the truth, celebrated the walls as though they had risen by mortal hands. They sang songs of their king's wisdom and strength, blind to the betrayal that had stained his honor. But beneath the songs and celebration, a silence lingered, heavy as storm clouds waiting at sea. The gods had been deceived, their labor scorned, and their trust cast aside in the name of pride. To betray a man was grave, but to betray a god was a wound that eternity itself would remember. Laomedon returned to his palace, his heart light with triumph, blind to the weight of what he had done. He believed the matter closed, the promise forgotten, the builders dismissed as if they were nothing. But Poseidon carried the insult like salt in the ocean, bitter and sharp, never to be dissolved away. For the sea forgets nothing, and the god who stirs its waves remembers every word, every broken vow. Apollo too withdrew, his light dimmed, yet his silence carried more judgment than words ever could. The city stood proud, its towers shining, but within their foundation a curse now lay in waiting. Not a curse of spell or shadow, but of memory, for gods do not forget, nor forgive with ease. The walls that promised safety also carried the seed of doom, hidden yet certain, like a tide unseen. In the years to come, Troy would trust in those walls, believing themselves beyond reach of harm. Yet every stone was a reminder to Poseidon, every tower a symbol of the insult that had been cast. And though he turned away, the sea god's heart burned with anger, slow and vast as the ocean's depth. The waves whispered his fury, carrying it to distant shores, warning that Troy's pride would one day fall. For broken promises are not buried. They drift like wreckage, always returning to the shore in time. And so the betrayal of Laomedon became the seed of Poseidon's wrath, a storm waiting to awaken. The walls stood tall, the city rejoiced, but the sea beyond was restless, its master silent yet watchful. And in that silence, the fate of Troy was sealed, not by war yet, but by the anger of the sea. The years passed, and Troy's splendor only grew, its ships ruling the sea lanes, its markets rich with treasures. Merchants brought silk, spices, and gold, and the city gleamed as though it were favored by all the heavens. The walls still stood strong, silent guardians watching as generations were born and grew beneath their shadows. Laomedon aged, his hair silvering, but his pride remained untouched, sharper than any blade in his halls. He believed Troy invincible, chosen by destiny, forgetting that the gods themselves had laid each stone in place. The people echoed his pride, boasting that no city could rival Troy's glory or its strength in all the world. But beneath the waves, Poseidon remembered, his fury steady, his patience stretched as wide as the endless sea. The sea god does not rush, for the ocean teaches him that tides return, always, no matter how long delayed. And so Poseidon watched, his eyes fixed on Troy, his wrath deepening with every tide that kissed its shores. Mortals forgot, as mortals do, but gods do not, for memory is their weapon, eternal as the heavens above. Apollo too had not forgiven, though he spoke no word, his silence sharper than any curse laid by hand. The sun rose each day over Troy, but its warmth carried no blessing, only light that revealed hidden pride. And pride, when left to grow unchecked, becomes a blindness that leads even the greatest city to its ruin. One night, as Troy slept, the waves rolled louder, pounding the shore as though demanding the king's attention. The sailors heard it, the fishermen trembled, but the palace slept in silence, blind to the sea's warning. Poseidon's anger stirred the depths, his trident flashing, his voice carried in the thunder of waves on stone. He did not yet strike, but the sea around Troy grew restless, as if it awaited his final command. The city thrived by day, but whispers spread at night of strange omens that no one could explain. The tides shifted too suddenly, ships vanished into calm seas, and fish no longer swam near Troy's harbor. The old spoke in hushed voices, saying the sea was watching, waiting, remembering promises long left unpaid. But the young laughed, dismissing the fears as foolish tales, for had not the walls kept them safe always? And the king silenced the whispers, forbidding any word that might spread weakness among his people's hearts. Yet the whispers did not die, for the sea's voice cannot be silenced, only ignored at one's peril. Poseidon waited, letting the unease grow, knowing mortals often destroy themselves before a god need intervene. For when pride blinds, even the strongest walls can become cages, trapping a city in its own illusion. The silence of Apollo deepened too, for he would not sing to Troy nor grant his light in joy. His distance was felt, though unspoken, a heaviness in the air, as though song itself had abandoned the city. And still, the people celebrated festivals, raising cups to gods who had not heard them for many years. They offered thanks for harvests and trade, yet never to the one who ruled the sea they depended upon. Each unspoken word, each forgotten sacrifice, deepened the insult until it became a wound no time could heal. Poseidon's wrath, vast and patient, was like a tide pulling back, preparing to surge with unstoppable force. And though no mortal saw it, the gods above watched, knowing that Troy's pride would meet its reckoning. For the anger of the sea is not sudden. It builds, gathering strength until the world itself must yield. And so, beneath the calm of Troy's daily life, the storm within Poseidon swelled, unseen but inevitable. The city glowed, its towers shone, but fate was shifting, and the ocean's silence carried a promise of ruin. For in every wave that broke upon Troy's shore, there echoed the vow of a god who would not forget. The whispers grew louder with time, carried by sailors who spoke of strange sights upon the open sea. They told of waves that rose without wind, and storms that vanished as quickly as they came to life. Fishermen swore the ocean pulled stronger than before, dragging nets and boats as though guided by unseen hands. The elders remembered the old stories of Poseidon's labor and Laomedon's betrayal, and they trembled in silence. But when they spoke of it, the young laughed, mocking the past, saying gods had no power over Troy. For had not the walls stood tall for decades, untouched, unbroken, a shield against all the world's chaos? Laomedon, too, dismissed the warnings, his pride stronger than caution, his heart blind to divine patience. He sat upon his throne, believing himself master not only of men, but of fate itself, eternal as Troy. But fate is no servant of kings, and the gods wait longer than any mortal can measure in years. Poseidon watched, his fury deepening, his trident resting heavy, his silence more terrible than any spoken curse. In his halls beneath the waves, the sea god called forth the currents, gathering strength from every ocean. Creatures of the deep stirred, sensing his unrest, their vast shapes gliding silently through the endless blue. The dolphins no longer played near the shores, and whales sang of a coming storm in mournful tones. Even the smallest fish vanished from Troy's waters, leaving sailors to stare into empty nets with fear. Yet the people filled their markets, sang their songs, and trusted the walls, deaf to the sea's warning. Only a few priests, old and weary, left offerings upon the shore, begging for mercy from forgotten gods. But the offerings were too small, too late, their prayers scattered like shells against the roar of waves. Poseidon's patience frayed, like rope pulled taut, ready to snap and unleash all the fury of the sea. He spoke little, but his will spread through the tides, and the ocean itself became a weapon waiting. The stars above watched in silence, and Apollo turned his face, offering no light of comfort to Troy. The city shone by day, its towers glittering, but at night the shadows grew long, thick with unease. Children woke from dreams of roaring waters, mothers whispered of omens, and sailors feared each voyage more. Yet Laomedon stood unmoved, his voice stern, forbidding panic, declaring Troy's greatness eternal and untouched. But arrogance cannot shield against the sea, for stone may stand against man, but not against eternity. Poseidon's anger gathered like thunderclouds beyond the horizon, hidden yet certain, waiting only for the hour. Each wave that struck Troy's shore carried his vow, a rhythm of wrath that only the gods could hear. The world beyond Troy began to speak of it too, travelers telling tales of storms with no cause. The Aegean grew restless, the islands trembling at tides, and harbors far away prayed for Poseidon's favor. But Troy gave nothing. No song, no sacrifice, only silence, where devotion should have filled the air. And so the city's fate tightened, woven thread by thread, into a tapestry only the gods could see. The people thought themselves safe, but they lived within walls that carried both gift and curse in stone. Poseidon's silence was their warning, his stillness the calm that comes before the greatest storm of all. For no mortal pride can stand forever when the sea itself rises to claim what has been denied. And though Troy laughed, feasted, and sang, the ocean was listening, its master waiting with timeless resolve. The tide was turning, slow but certain, and in its pull lay the first notes of Troy's undoing. The tide of fate shifted one night, when a storm rose sudden and fierce upon Troy's peaceful shore. Winds howled like wild beasts, and waves crashed against the harbor with a fury unseen in generations past. Ships broke loose from their moorings, splintering upon rocks, while sailors cried out to gods who gave no reply. The people woke to thunder and lightning, their city trembling as the sea raged with Poseidon's unspoken wrath. Yet the walls of Troy held firm, their stones gleaming with rain, their towers unbroken against the storm's force. The citizens cheered at dawn, believing themselves blessed, blind to the warning written in the sea's anger. Laomedon stood upon the walls, his robe soaked, declaring Troy stronger than any storm or god of the deep. His voice carried pride, But beneath it lay defiance, a challenge cast against the ocean's unyielding power. Poseidon watched in silence, his fury swelling like a tide that retreats only to strike with greater strength. For the storm had not been meant to destroy, but to remind, to show that the sea had not forgotten. The people celebrated survival, feasting as though the tempest had proven Troy untouchable for all time. But in their joy, they missed the truth that storms return, each greater, each closer to breaking stone. Among them, the priests trembled, whispering that a debt unpaid will always return, no matter how long delayed. They laid offerings upon the shore, wine and incense cast into the waves. Yet the sea gave no reply. Poseidon's silence was heavier than words, his stillness more terrible than thunder, his memory sharp as coral. In the depths, he summoned his will, calling creatures of the deep, preparing tides that would shake the world. The dolphins fled the coasts, sharks gathered in dark swarms, and the whales swam far, leaving the waters bare. The sea itself grew strange, its surface too calm at times, its depths restless with hidden, shifting currents. Fishermen dared not sail, merchants feared the harbor, and yet Laomedon stood unbending, blind to the signs. He scorned the priests, mocked their fears, declaring that Troy's walls were their god, their shield, their salvation. The people echoed him, trusting stone more than sacrifice, forgetting that stone itself was born of the earth. And so the city drifted deeper into its pride, while the sea's patience waned and its fury grew vast. Even Apollo, silent still, turned his gaze aside, unwilling to shield a city that spurned divine bonds. The sun shone, but its warmth was cold, and its light fell heavy, revealing pride instead of blessing. Children played upon the walls, laughing at the sea below, their joy blind to the storm yet to come. The elders shook their heads, remembering the vow, yet their voices were silenced by the king's stern command. And so Troy stood, bright and proud, as the ocean plotted in silence, a storm coiling in its heart. Poseidon's wrath was not of one night or one storm, but of eternity, building with every forgotten prayer. Each wave upon Troy's shore was a heartbeat of anger, each tide a promise of vengeance yet to strike. The city thought itself eternal, but the gods saw only a flame that burned too bright to endure. And so, while Troy rejoiced in its pride, the sea waited, its silence filled with the weight of doom. For no city, no wall, no king can escape the memory of a god, nor the anger of the sea. A new season dawned, and with it came whispers carried by merchants from distant lands across the sea. They spoke of omens seen in waves, of shadows moving beneath ships, of seas that swallowed fleets whole. Troy listened with curiosity, but not fear, for the city believed its walls stronger than any tale of gods. The markets thrived, music filled the streets, and the people laughed, blind to the storm gathering in silence. Laomedon walked proudly through the squares, his crown shining in the sunlight, his words filled with boldness. He told his people Troy was chosen, that no god could harm what men had built with stone and sweat. Yet in secret chambers, the priests gathered, their scrolls open, their eyes searching the skies for signs. One whispered that the constellations shifted, that stars no longer aligned with Troy's ancient promises to gods. Another warned that the sea was unnatural, too calm one day, too violent the next, never steady or kind. Still, the king refused to listen, dismissing them as fearful voices trying to weaken his city's bright heart. Poseidon's patience thinned, and in the depths he called forth a great creature, unseen since the world was young. It stirred in the abyss, its body vast, its breath churning bubbles, its roar echoing across trenches unseen by men. The sea grew darker in places, its surface rippling though no wind blew, as if something immense waited below. Fishermen returned empty-handed, their nets torn, their boats shaken by unseen forces in the restless waters. Children by the shore spoke of glowing shapes beneath the waves, eyes watching from the dark like lanterns. Sailors prayed before voyages, casting bread and wine into the sea, hoping to appease the god they once wronged. But Poseidon remained silent, his hand heavy, his will gathering like a tide that cannot be held back. The creature rose closer, circling unseen, its shadow stretching beneath ships, its hunger mirroring its master's wrath. Laomedon heard the rumors and laughed, declaring that Troy had nothing to fear, for its walls were eternal. His words echoed across the city, filling hearts with pride, but also blinding them to warnings etched in waves. The priests warned again, their voices trembling, that no wall could guard against the sea when gods commanded it. But their words found no ear, their warnings drowned in the noise of feasts, festivals, and the king's proud boasts. The sea sent smaller signs, ships stranded upon calm waters, storms that appeared and vanished within an hour. Still Troy endured, its towers shining, its people certain of their strength, unaware of the storm yet to come. Poseidon watched, unmoved, his gaze fixed upon the city that mocked his name with every proud proclamation. He whispered to the tides, and the tides carried his command, rushing faster, striking harder against the shore. The harbor groaned beneath the pressure, its stones shifting, its docks trembling with each heavy wave. And in the night, when all seemed calm, the sea glowed faintly, as though stars had fallen beneath its waves. Children pointed in awe, calling it beauty, but the elders trembled, knowing it was a sign of something vast. The priests lit fires along the shore, chanting prayers older than kings, their voices rising with the wind. But the sea did not answer, for Poseidon's silence was his promise, and his promise was vengeance, unfulfilled. The creature stirred again, closer now, its shape breaking the surface for a moment, vast as a hill. Its roar was carried on the wind, mistaken for thunder by those who did not stand near the shore. The waves rolled higher, the tide pulled stronger, and yet the city still sang, still feasted, still dreamed. For Troy trusted its stones, forgetting that stone cannot breathe beneath water, nor walls stand against the sea. And so the city slept, wrapped in pride, while beneath them the ocean prepared to rise with fury untold. Poseidon's anger was no longer a whisper, but a voice waiting to roar, and Troy's silence was its answer. The dawn broke calm, the sea lying still, yet beneath the surface currents shifted with restless, hidden force. Sailors walked the harbor uneasy, their eyes on the water that gleamed too bright, too smooth to be natural. Birds that once filled the sky with song flew inland, leaving the shore empty, their absence a silent warning. Children pointed at the horizon, where a faint line of darkness lingered, though the sun rose high and strong. Laomedon saw and laughed, declaring it nothing but cloud, a shadow with no power against Troy's proud walls. The people cheered, their king's words sweet to ears weary of rumors, though doubt lingered in some hearts. The priests gathered once more, their voices urgent, begging Laomedon to offer penance before it was too late. But the king refused, his pride a shield stronger than faith, his heart deaf to the echo of old promises. Poseidon's gaze pierced the depths, his hand upon the currents, his command whispered to the ancient sea beast. The creature stirred again, closer now, its body vast, its shadow stretching across miles of ocean floor. Its roar rose through the deep, unheard by men, Yet the waters trembled, the tides pulling faster toward the land. At night, the sea glowed again, brighter, alive with strange colors, as though fire burned beneath the waves. The people gathered in awe, mistaking danger for wonder, marveling as though it were a gift from the gods. Merchants prayed over their ships, captains clutched charms, yet few dared sail, fearing the sea's growing hunger. One old fisherman spoke of ancient tales, of creatures bound by gods, released only in times of great wrath. His words were ignored, dismissed as rambling, though in his eyes the sea's glow was a sign of doom. The priests burned incense by the shore, their chants rising, but the smoke blew inland, away from the sea. It was as if Poseidon rejected their prayers, refusing gifts from a city that had mocked his name. Laomedon's pride flared brighter, his words bold, declaring that Troy owed nothing to gods who abandoned them. He feasted with nobles, raising cups to the city's strength, their laughter drowning the voices of fearful priests. But in the harbor, ships creaked and swayed, their ropes strained though the air was calm and still. The water lapped strangely at the docks, rhythm broken, as though the sea itself had lost its steady heart. Children played nearby, their laughter ringing, while the elders watched the horizon with eyes shadowed by dread. For they remembered promises made, oaths spoken, and debts unpaid, though no one dared voice them aloud. The night grew heavy, the wind thick with salt, the moon casting long shadows across Troy's silent walls. From the depths came a sound, low and vast, like stone breaking under weight, too great to endure. The sea rolled once, then stilled, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting stars like a mirror of the sky. But beneath, the creature rose, each movement stirring waves, each breath boiling the water with unseen fury. The priests fell to their knees, begging gods for mercy, their voices lost against the silence of the sea. Even Apollo's temples fell quiet, as though the sun itself turned its face from the city's pride. Laomedon stood upon the walls, unmoved, declaring that Troy was eternal, that no god could break its might. His words echoed into the night, carried by winds to the restless sea, to Poseidon's unyielding ear. The god's patience was gone, his fury sharpened, his vengeance coiled like a storm ready to strike. Each wave now carried weight, each tide struck harder, each whisper of wind a promise of rising doom. The people slept, but the sea did not, its heart beating faster, its rage growing vast as the horizon. For no wall, no crown, no king could silence the memory of betrayal, nor stop the sea from rising. And so the city dreamed in pride, while the ocean prepared to answer with the roar of gods. The end came not with fire nor spear, but with water rising vast and merciless from the endless sea. Waves towered like mountains, their roar drowning the city's songs, their spray reaching higher than Troy's proud towers. The creature emerged at last, its shadow eclipsing the moon, its roar shaking the walls like thunder in stone. The people screamed, their joy turned to fear, their pride crumbling as the sea claimed what had once defied it. Laomedon stood upon the walls, his crown heavy, his eyes wide as he saw the promise of gods fulfilled. The priests cried out, their voices lost in the storm, their prayers torn apart by the wind and the waves. The sea struck once, twice, thrice, each blow heavier, until the harbor broke and the docks splintered to dust. Ships were tossed like leaves, crushed upon the rocks, their sails shredded, their wood shattered beneath the storm. Still the walls stood, gleaming, proud, yet each wave carved at their base, each tide pulling stone into the sea. Children clung to their mothers, elders wept in silence, and the mighty city trembled with each crashing roar. The creature circled, its eyes glowing deep, its body vast, its breath boiling the waters with Poseidon's fury. The king raised his voice, shouting defiance, but his words were drowned in thunder, unheard by mortal or god. Poseidon rose from the waves, not in full form but as storm and tide, his power etched in water and wind. His voice was a rumble beneath the sea, a command that shook the earth and bent the will of tides. "Troy forgot," he said, though no man heard. "And so Troy shall pay, not for vengeance, but for memory." The walls shuddered, their stones groaning, cracks spreading like veins as the sea clawed deeper with endless strength. The people fled, their torches scattered, their voices rising in chaos as the city that defied gods began to fall. Apollo watched from afar, his light dimmed, his silence unbroken, unwilling to shield a city that mocked divine bonds. The creature roared again, its sound the last lullaby of Troy's pride, a reminder of debts unpaid to gods. One final wave rose, taller than the walls, brighter than moonlight, its crest crowned with Poseidon's wrath. It fell with fury, swallowing towers, streets, and temples, erasing the pride of men beneath the weight of sea. When the dawn came, silence lay heavy, the city broken, the shore littered with remnants of stone and wood. The walls still stood in part, jagged and scarred, a reminder that no pride can stand eternal against the gods. The people who survived wept, scattered across the land, carrying the memory of a city lost to the sea. Laomedon was gone, his crown lost, his defiance drowned, his name remembered not as king, but as warning. And Poseidon's fury ebbed, his storm subsiding, his sea returning to calm, though his anger remained eternal. The creature sank back into the abyss, its duty fulfilled, its shadow fading into the deep where no man dared. The waves rolled gently once more, but each tide carried whispers of Troy, a name sung only by the sea. The gods turned their eyes away, for the lesson was written. The price paid, the story bound in silence. And so Troy's pride became its fall, its walls remembered not for strength, but for the wrath they once defied. Poseidon's anger lived on, not in storm nor beast, but in memory, in the warning of every restless tide. For cities rise and fall, kings live and die, but the sea endures, eternal, patient, keeper of divine debts. And when men forget, when pride blinds their hearts, the ocean waits, silent, until the time comes again.